Have you ever had to walk away from a toxic family member? No names, just yes or no.
I will start with the part that makes people lean in, because that is what I wish someone had done for me when I was still giving everyone the benefit of the doubt. My father poured me a drink as a so-called peace offering after forgetting my birthday yet again. He set the glass right in front of me like a trophy he could hand out whenever it suited him. My sister smiled, because she had just finished telling everyone about the cruise he covered from tip to taxes, and I looked at the drink, looked at him, and slid it gently toward her, and when she took a swallow to keep the spotlight where she likes it, she started coughing into her napkin while he stared, and I just kept eating like nothing was wrong. Because in my house the only way to be heard is to stop trying to be heard at all and make them listen to silence instead. You know that feeling when someone keeps doing the same hurtful thing and apologizes with something shiny, as if the gloss is supposed to stand in for memory, for thoughtfulness, for time spent paying attention. I had that feeling humming in my chest while he did his usual routine, telling me he meant to call, that work ran late, that he wanted us to start fresh, and I nodded in that practiced way you learn when you have been the backup plan for years. And I watched my sister straighten in her chair like she was the headliner at a show where I was only allowed to be the opening act, because she believes, and he confirms, that her wins belong to everyone and my milestones belong to silence. I did not want the drink, not because I do not drink, but because I do not drink when I am being handled. I know my father's brand of soft control, the generous pour, the exaggerated smile. The pat on the shoulder that says, let's not make this awkward, while he makes it all about how gracious he is to offer me anything at all. So I passed it to the person he actually rewards, the one who gets the upgrades, the paid trips, the careful attention that arrives on schedule like a subscription, and it was not cruel, and it was not a prank. It was a message written without words, a small reversal that said if you want a show, then you can watch the headliner choke a little on the moment she thought she owned. My sister coughed because the drink was strong and because she was talking while swallowing and because she loves to perform, and that means she does not pause to breathe when eyes are on her, and as she dabbed at her mouth and laughed it off. My father's face did that quick scan between her and me that I have known since childhood, the scan that measures which one will create the least trouble if he keeps the favor on the same side as always, and for once I did not fill the space with eager little explanations to make him comfortable. I kept eating, I kept quiet, and I let him carry the weight of the moment he created, because I am tired of carrying things I did not break. He started in with the lines he always uses when he senses that his peace offering is not landing, lines about how family should let things go, how he did his best, and how it is just a day. And I could feel the heat rise in my neck the way it does when someone reduces you to a calendar entry they repeatedly miss. But instead of fighting, I reached for the salt, I passed the bread, I asked my mother if she wanted more. And I made it absolutely obvious that I did not need a staged apology. To survive a day he forgot, I needed him to understand that I see the pattern, that I am not impressed by his effort to smooth the table after he has already carved the grooves into it. My sister, who is very proud of her luck and very used to my father's credit card acting like a rescue boat for every plan she makes, leaned over to me and whispered that I should be gracious, which is the word people use when they want the person who got less to smile wider so the person who got more does not have to feel anything, and I turned my head just enough to say that I was being gracious by not calling out the obvious in front of the whole family, and that if she really wanted harmony, she could offer me the one thing I never seem to get, which is basic honesty. She laughed, but it was tight, and I think that was the first time she understood that I was not going to play the understudy anymore. I am not pretending that sliding a glass changed our history or rewired the family tree, and I am not pretending it was kind, but I will say it felt straight. It felt like answering in the same language my father has always used, where gifts are supposed to erase absence and where anyone who questions the exchange is labeled ungrateful, because when you grow up learning that your best shot at love is to be easy, to be quiet, to be low maintenance, your anger can go slippery and show up in decisions that look small but are heavy, and I am done apologizing for the weight of my own boundary. The truth is that I had already been keeping a list in my head, not the vindictive kind with tallies and punishments, but the plain kind with dates and facts and the way people behaved when it counted. And that list was starting to guide me more than my hope that one more year would fix what all the other years did not. So when he forgot my birthday again and tried to put a bow on it with a glass and a speech, I let the list make my choice for me. And I followed it up with something even I did not expect, which was how calm I felt while everyone else scrambled to patch the mood. He asked me, later in the meal, if I was upset, in that tone that warns you the answer he will accept is no, and I said I was fine. Which was true in the way that you can be fine when you finally stop arguing with gravity and decide to build your house on rock instead of trying to hold up the sky. And he nodded like we had reached an agreement, and I nodded back because we had. Just not the one he thought. He agreed to keep doing what he does, and I agreed to stop making it easy for him. I know some people will say I should have stood up and delivered the speech I have memorized in the shower, the one with all the dates and all the times he was there for her and gone for me. The one where I ask him flat out why he thinks I am the one who can handle being invisible, but I have learned that speeches give people things to debate, while actions give them a mirror, and I wanted him to look at himself instead of my words. So I kept mine to a minimum and let the mirror sit right there, on the table in the shape of an untouched apology. By the time dessert hit the table, my sister was back to laughing loud and telling cruise stories like she had personally captained the ship. My father was chuckling along and nudging her for details. My mother was doing that gentle hum that says, "Please, everyone, let this be easy." And I was thinking about how ease always seems to mean that I carry the discomfort so they do not have to. And I decided I would try something different next time, something that would not look like a fight but would land like one, because I finally understood that I did not need permission to set the terms for how I would be treated. That was the first move, and I made it without raising my voice or asking for anything, and as my father cleared his throat like a man about to announce a plan he had already decided on, I realized I was ready for his next gesture. Because this time I would not swallow it or slide it away. This time I was going to show everyone, in a way that could not be spun, what it looks like when the person who has always been the afterthought writes the agenda, and if you think the glass was a statement, you should hear what I said the next time he tried to make me disappear with a toast. The next time we all sat down together, my father did what he always does when he wants to control the mood without admitting he is the reason it needs controlling. He stood up with a smile already pasted on and tapped his glass like the sound itself could erase the week with no call and the birthday that slipped by again, and he started talking about my sister, whose name is Tessa, because of course he did. He praised her for being spontaneous and brave and said something about how she reminds him of what it feels like to be young and hungry for life, and I watched his eyes while he performed. I watched them go past me like I am a chair he has always owned and no longer sees. And when he paused for everyone to lift their glasses, I reached out my hand and took the floor like I was picking up something that belonged to me, and I said, "Before we toast, I have a small tradition this year since no one else started one for me." And I pulled a plain card from my bag and told them I would read my birthday note aloud, which is to myself, because I figured the person who remembered it should be the one to speak on it. I wrote that card in the calmest way I know, not as a joke and not as a rage letter, just a straight record of what happened and how it felt. And as I read, I kept my voice even and conversational and, honestly, a little amused at how ridiculous the pattern has become. And I said, "Dear me, you kept your head down and your expectations managed, and still you got the same old treatment. You got the afterthought and the make nice speech and the drink that was supposed to distract from the part where you were forgotten, and you did not cry, and you did not beg, and you did not explain to a grown man how calendars work. You just slid the glass to the person who gets remembered, and you kept eating, which in this family is a bigger scandal than it sounds." And when I finished that part, my father started to cough in that I am about to interrupt way, and my mother, whose name is Linda, reached for my sleeve and whispered that I was being unkind, and I smiled at her and said I am finally being clear. Tessa tried to laugh it off, the way people do when they think the person telling the truth is being dramatic, and she said the card was over the top and that I should not make everyone uncomfortable because we are just trying to have a nice evening. And I told her I would love a nice evening, which to me looks like people owning what they do instead of dressing it up. And then I kept reading, because the second half of the card was not about the drink at all. It was about the way apologies in Our house get used like coupons that overwrite the bill, and I wrote that I am done pretending the coupon pays for the meal, which is not poetry and not a metaphor, it is just how it is. And I could tell from the sudden stillness that they finally understood I did not drag this out to be theatrical. I dragged it out because I am tired of dragging it around alone. Frank is my father, and he looked at me like a man who wants a fire extinguisher for a candle, and he said we should take this offline, which is a phrase he likes because it makes him feel managerial and above conflict. And I said we absolutely will talk one-on-one, and we can start with the part where you told me work ran late, while my bank alert pinged at the same time for a cruise deposit with your name on it. And that got his attention faster than any speech I have ever given, not because he is afraid of the truth for the truth's sake, but because he hates when timelines line up in ways he cannot spin, and he said I was making a scene, and I said I am making a record. Here is what I did next, which will sound petty until you have lived it, and then it will sound like oxygen. I lifted my own glass and said I would like to propose a toast, not to me and not to Tessa and not to Frank, but to the idea that from now on we speak to each other in receipts and not in promises, and I said I printed some, which I had, nothing dramatic, just a little stack of screenshots and calendar invites and red acknowledgements that show who knew what and when, and I slid them across to him the way he slid that drink to me the last time, and he did not touch them, and I told him that was fine because I did not need him to touch the paper in order for the truth to touch the room. Linda whispered that I was embarrassing everyone, and I said I understand why it feels that way, because I used to think the same thing whenever I imagined telling the truth out loud. But what is actually embarrassing is how I learned to manage my own celebration like a task at work so that the people who claim to love me would not have to remember the date themselves, and I do not want to live like that anymore. And I will not be the person who makes it easy for them to pretend that nothing is wrong, and I meant every word of that, not from a high horse, but from a very grounded place that I have bled to reach. Tessa fired back that I was trying to take her moment, and I told her there is always a moment waiting for her because someone else makes it, and that I am not interested in stealing anything that was handed over for free. I am interested in building something I own, which starts with saying out loud that I am done accepting the role where I clap for everyone else while being told to keep my voice soft and my mess private, and she said I was being cruel, and I said I was being specific. And specificity always feels harsh when you have been living on vague. I ended my toast by thanking everyone for listening, and then, because revenge in my life is not about slamming doors but about closing loops, I handed Frank the plain envelope that held my card and a photocopy of that bank alert showing the exact moment the deposit hit. And I said he could keep it as a souvenir if he needed a reminder the next time he wants to tell me that work swallowed his day whole, and when he reached for a comeback that would make him look wise and me look childish, I set my glass down and told him I would be bringing a folder the next time we gather, not to humiliate anyone and not to turn dinner into a courtroom, but to stop pretending that I am invisible when I am the one who actually keeps the invisible pieces from falling apart. And then I sat down and ate my meal in complete peace, because there is a kind of quiet that follows a clean line being drawn. And I finally had it. What none of them knew, and what I kept to myself as a kind of private smile, was that the folder I promised was already assembled. Not full of drama, but full of the practical things that show how the story everyone likes to tell is not the story that has been paying the bills. And I decided I would open it the next time Frank tried to cast me as the difficult one while praising Tessa for being generous with things she did not actually provide, because if the first move was taking the toast, the next move would be showing them who has really been carrying the table. I brought the folder because I was tired of living with a story that kept bending around other people's comfort, and I wanted something I could touch when the room tried to turn my facts into feelings. So I set it on the table the way someone sets down their keys when they are finally home. And when Frank tried to make a joke about me turning dinner into an audit, I smiled in that steady way you learn when you stop asking for permission to tell the truth, and I said it is not an audit, it is a translation, because clearly my plain words have not been making it across, and if paper helps everyone listen, then paper it is. I did not raise my voice, and I did not make a speech about fairness or love or any of the big ideas that people use to float above the details, because big ideas are easy to nod at while you keep doing what you have always done. So instead I slid out the first page, which was a bank alert showing the exact evening he said work ran late and he missed my birthday because of a crisis, and I pointed to the timestamp and said this was the cruise deposit, and I am not here to argue about whether Tessa deserved a trip or whether you had a right to spend your money the way you want. I am here to say that if you want to tell stories about your intentions, then you also need to stand next to the map of what you actually did. And the map shows you remembered a vacation purchase, and you forgot your daughter's day, and that is not a character assassination, that is a calendar. Tessa tried to cut in with that laugh she uses when she wants everyone to move past discomfort so the spotlight can swing back to her highlight reel, and she said I was being dramatic about a date on a phone like I was trying to win a courtroom game. And I told her the only game I am tired of is the one where my feelings are called dramatic when they are just inconvenient. And then I pulled the next pages, which were the monthly autopay confirmations from the card I had been using to keep two of Frank's bills from going delinquent because he asked me to step in quietly during a rough patch, and I explained that I said yes, because I am not cruel and because I believed him when he promised it was temporary. And I said it stayed temporary right up until the part where the silence became permanent and the gratitude turned into this weird expectation that I would keep carrying the pieces you pretend do not exist. And Frank started to say he would have told people if I had not insisted he keep it private, and I said that is a half-truth at best, because you know exactly why I asked for privacy. It was not to protect you. It was to protect me from exactly this performance where you make the helper look controlling, so you do not have to look absent. Linda reached for my forearm with that pleading softness she uses when she wants the waves to stop, and she said this could be a misunderstanding and that maybe I am reading too much into things. And I told her I do not need anyone to read into anything because I brought printouts, and I put down a copy of the transfer I made last year when her outpatient bill was suddenly due and Frank's check had not cleared yet, and I said I did it because I care. I did it because I am the adult who handles what needs handling, and I am not even mad about doing it. I am mad about how I do it, and then listen to a man brag about generosity while he forgets me. And if that stings, then maybe the sting is the beginning of feeling. Which is how change gets started in this family, if it gets started at all. Frank said I was humiliating him, and I said I am handing back responsibility, which might feel similar if you are used to letting me carry your weight, and Tessa muttered that I love to make things about me. And I told her I actually hate making things about me. I have been trained not to, which is how we got here, but since we are here, I am going to be specific. And then I took out the envelope with the authorized user letter I had already mailed and the digital confirmation that removed her card from my account, and I said this is not punishment and it is not even revenge in the way people think about revenge. It is a boundary with paperwork, because if you are going to be the golden child, then you can also manage your own shine without my credit holding up the light, and I watched her face work through the math of a life where the bill is not sent to me by default, and I will not pretend it was not satisfying to see comprehension land. Before anyone could spin that into cruelty, I made sure to say, slowly and clearly, that I am not going to let anything collapse or put anyone at risk. Which is why I have already called the utilities and set a hard stop for the 1st of next month with a courtesy notice sent to both of you, and I have also updated the emergency contact lists so that Tessa, who is apparently the brave and spontaneous one, will get the first call for ride pickups and pharmacy runs and scheduling follow-ups. Because she deserves the chance to be as generous as the legend says she is, and if she does not want that chance, then perhaps the legend can take a night off. And yes, I said all of that without raising my voice, because I wanted every syllable to land. I could feel the room tilting toward chaos, so I studied it with one more choice that I had held back until I knew I could say it without shaking. And I told Frank that the small business line he asked me to guarantee back when things were rough is going to be refinanced or released by the end of the season, because I am done being the safety net you pretend not to need. And I said I would help with the paperwork, because I am not trying to leave anyone in a ditch, but the era of invisible labor is over, and he stared at me like he was finally seeing a person where he had been seeing a role, and that look was almost enough to make me cry if I had not cried this well dry already. What I did not say but felt buzzing under my tongue like a live wire was that this was just the middle move, not the final one, because I have learned that power does not come from one grand speech. It comes from a series of quiet turns that change the direction of the whole road. So when Tessa asked, with a kind of sharp sweetness that only she can manage, whether I planned to parade more receipts in front of the extended family at the barbecue next month, I smiled and told her I planned to. Tell the truth wherever the story is being told, and if that makes anyone uncomfortable, then maybe they can choose comfort by telling it accurately themselves. And I let that sit there as my revenge for the night, not because it was loud or flashy, but because it was a promise with a deadline, and I keep my promises even when other people do not. When the barbecue rolled around with cousins and aunts and people who like to tell the same stories until the grooves get so deep they sound like truth, I already knew Frank would do what he always does when he senses the room might remember the parts he prefers to skip. He grabbed the easy microphone of casual conversation and steered it toward one of his greatest hits about the time I supposedly left Tessa stranded during a big week for her, and how he had to swoop in like the responsible one. Well, I learned a lesson about priorities, and I let him go on because I wanted every word and every laugh and every nod to land the way it always lands before I touched any of it. I wanted no one to say later that I ambushed a sweet memory. So I waited until he reached the punchline where I am the one who is careless and Tessa is the one who is resilient, and he is the dad who saves the day, and then I said, soft and clear, that this is the part where the credits roll with my name cut out even, though my voice is on the soundtrack. I did not raise a finger, and I did not raise my voice. I just asked him to repeat the date so we could all picture it together, and when he did I took out my phone, not as a weapon but as a filing cabinet. Because some of us have had to keep records just to hold on to our own version of our lives. And I told everyone that the night he is talking about I was calling pharmacies and urgent care and making sure Linda got home safe after a scare that we all agreed not to broadcast, and that while I was driving and juggling messages, Tessa called me from a friend's place because she had left her car across town after an argument and did not want Frank to know she was there. And I said yes, like I always did back then. I said yes, because that was the role I knew. And I went to get her, and I took the heat when the plan ran long and the timing got messy, which is what made it convenient later to tell this version where I forgot her, and I looked at Tessa and I asked if she wanted to correct the record herself or if she preferred that I do it, and she took a breath that sounded like she was choosing the old path, and then she looked at the family and said she did not remember, and so I pressed play on the voicemail from that night. The thing about a voicemail is that it does not care about how a family likes its stories told. It does not bend to keep the cookout light. It just rolls in the exact voice that spoke it. And the room heard Tessa ask me to cover because she did not want a lecture, and heard me say I would handle it, and heard me tell her I was with Linda and would be late. And when it ended there was that thick quiet that falls when people suddenly realize they have been clapping for a scene they never watched closely, and I did not gloat because I am tired of gloating being my only power. I just turned to Frank and told him that if he wants to keep using that story, then he can use the right name in the right places. And if he cannot do that, then he can retire the bit and find a new routine that does not feed itself on me. Linda touched my elbow and said we could sort it out later, and I told her that later is what we say when we want the person who got cut out to do the smoothing in private so the person who did the cutting can stay comfortable in public. And I am not doing that anymore, and I added that I kept that voicemail not to humiliate anyone but because I knew how quickly the ground shifts when everyone is invested in a version where the work I did is invisible, and if that sounds bitter then fine, I have earned a little bitterness alongside the competence everyone has been leaning on. Tessa tried to make a joke about me being a historian of family drama and said I must have archives somewhere, and I told her the only archive I keep is the difference between what happened and what gets said. And I slid one more small fact across the table while keeping my voice easy, which was that the same week her trip was booked in full. A dentist bill for me sat unpaid until I handled it myself without ever asking for help. And I added that I am not asking for repayment or applause, I am asking for accuracy, and that word landed like a slow bell. You could see people glance away, and then back like they were measuring what accuracy might do to the stories they like to pass around. Frank said I was making him look bad in front of people, and I told him I am putting a mirror in a place where we usually keep a curtain, and if you do not like what the mirror shows then you can change the thing in the mirror, not smash the glass. And Because I promised myself every chapter would end with an action and not only a speech, I opened the family group chat and sent a short message that said I will be fact-checking family stories going forward, not to ruin dinners, but to stop ruining people, and I attached the voicemail and the brief timeline of that night. Then I put the phone down and reached for the salad like this was any other afternoon, and that simple send was my revenge, clean and boring and impossible to talk away. I know some people think justice needs fanfare, but in my life the loudest thing is someone finally saying yes, that did happen, and Tessa looked at the phone, then at me, and then at the phone again, and I watched her decide between pride and relief. And to her credit, she chose relief. She told the table that I covered for her, and that she let the story stand because it was easier, and she said she was sorry in a voice that sounded like she meant it, and I nodded and told her that apology. Accepted means from now on she corrects it herself when it pops up, and she said she would, and that was a small win that felt big because it did not require me to bleed to earn it. The cousins drifted to other topics because that is what families do when the air gets heavy. They moved to weather and work and who brought the good sauce, and Frank stood there with the look of a man who just realized he does not own the microphone anymore. And I let him keep his pride by not drilling the point, but when he tried to resume the old rhythm with a fresh toast about families sticking together, I told him I had listened to that tune for long enough, and that sticking together starts with telling the truth about who actually sticks, and that was that, no shouting, no slam doors, just a record corrected in front of the people who needed to hear it. On my way out, he followed me to the car and did the thing he always does after he gets caught playing favorites. He offered another peace gesture, something about covering a bill I had already handled and maybe planning a weekend away to reconnect. And I told him I would think about it while knowing I had already decided that the next time he tried to buy the mood I would hand him something he could not spend around, and that is where I will leave it for now, because the last move deserves its own space and its own clean line, and when I drew it he finally understood that I was not just telling a new story, I was living a new rule. By the time we sat down again, I knew exactly what Frank would try because men like him do not retire their habits without giving them one last lap around the track. So he cleared his throat and did that careful smile that says he has chosen generosity as the story of the evening, not accountability, and he told me he wanted to make things right, that he would cover a deposit for a better place or a weekend away to reset. And he said it in that tone that assumes the offer is a gift and the gift is a leash, and I let him finish, because I have learned that interruption only feeds his belief that he is the calm one. Then I told him I appreciated the sentiment and that I had something to give back. And I slid a plain envelope across the table the way I once slid that drink, not as a stunt, but as a line that would not move this time no matter how he smiled at it. Inside the envelope was not a bill and not a plea. It was a small stack that closed every open tab he likes to keep running in the background, so he can return to them when he needs to feel important. There was the signed release from the bank removing my name from the small business line I guaranteed during his rough season. There was the confirmation of the end date for the utilities I have been carrying. There was the notice to the pharmacy and the clinic updating the first call to Tessa with the backup to Linda, and there was a short letter in my handwriting that said, I am not angry and I am not punishing you. I am just done renting space in a house where the rent is paid in apologies, and I want my keys back. And as he turned those pages with the careful fingers of a man searching for the trap, I added that the keys are a metaphor he could handle, not a trick, because I know the difference between pettiness and closure, and I chose closure on purpose. Tessa asked what happens when something urgent comes up and the people who usually solve it are busy, and I told her that is the beautiful part of adulthood everyone pretends to hate, but secretly loves when it works. You plan, you share the load, you step up. And you stop treating one person like a concierge you can tip with compliments when the job is done. And I reminded her, gently but without patting, that she has been introduced for years as the brave one who knows how to make things happen. So this is her chance to enjoy the title without the safety net she has been walking on, and she opened her mouth to argue and then closed it because she understood that I was not bluffing, not because I said it mean, but because I said it clean. Linda tried to ask if we could just call this a reset and keep the details off the table, and I told her we have lived on resets for so long that we forgot how to live with results, and that this is not a declaration of war. It is the end of an armistice I kept signing with someone who never honored the terms, and then I gave her a second envelope that I had addressed to her alone, and I told her it held a calendar, not a cute one with little quotes about family. A shared calendar with every birthday, every follow-up, every appointment and reminder we have been juggling, each event tagged to the person who asked for authority in this family, and I said she could share it with whoever wanted to be an adult in real time, but that I would only accept invites that had my name on them for a reason that felt like respect and not rescue, and for the first time in a long time, she looked relieved rather than scared, because someone had finally named the chaos and given it a door. Frank stared at the release letter like it had insulted him and said he would have helped if I had only asked, and I told him I did ask. For years I asked in the language of quiet confidence and availability and grace. And he heard it as permission to forget me, so I had to switch languages, and this one is paper and boundaries and follow-through, and he said I was making a big deal out of normal family messes, and I said normal is what you call it when it benefits you, and the rest of us call it work, and because every chapter one promised you would end with an action and not just a speech, I pulled out one more page, a short offer letter that I had signed earlier that week, and I told them I took a promotion, not across the country and not to prove a point, but because I earned it and because I finally stopped pretending my schedule needs to bend around empty toasts, and the new role comes with a raise and a different rhythm and a simple agreement with myself that I will not be available to be the villain in a story someone else is writing when I am busy living my own. Tessa tried to fish for a loophole by asking whether the promotion was why I had been so organized lately, and I told her the promotion was possible because I was so organized, that the life I have without their approval is the life I built while they were busy measuring me against a sister whose achievements they curated like a hobby, and I said it without venom because I did not want victory to taste like bitterness. I wanted it to taste like sanity, and then I did something that would look petty to a stranger and deeply fair to anyone who has ever been erased. I handed Frank a simple index card on which I had written one sentence for him to read out loud, and when he frowned I told him it was not a trap and it was not gotcha theater. It was the one thing I needed to hear in his voice before I left the table, and he read it because he wanted to be the man who could, and the sentence was this: I forgot your birthday again. I favored the child who needed me least, and I am sorry. Without a condition attached, and when he finished it he looked smaller in the way people look when they finally stop holding up a costume that does not fit anymore. I thanked him and told him that apology does not fix the years and it does not have to. It just closes the loop so we can all stop walking in circles, and I stood up because I had planned one last detail that mattered only to me. I had already paid the check before I sat down, and I had tipped like a person who knows exactly how much invisible labor goes into keeping a night from falling apart, and I told them I would be leaving first, not because I was angry but because I was finished, and that if they wanted to talk later they could put it on the calendar like grown people do, and I hugged Linda and I hugged Tessa and I looked at Frank and said I wish you well, I do, but I am not your proof that you tried. I am the person who finally stopped auditioning for the part you keep giving to someone else. On the drive home, I did not replay every line to see whether I could have made it softer or sharper. I listened to my own breathing like it was a language I was learning for the first time. And when my phone buzzed with the family group thread, I did not ignore it, and I did not jump. I opened it because I am not hiding from anything anymore, and I saw Tessa change the name of the chat to one word that mattered, which was accuracy. And I saw Linda add the shared calendar link with a note asking people to pick their responsibilities that month, and I saw nothing from Frank, which felt exactly right, and I put the phone face down and sat in the quiet of my own place that I chose and paid for and arranged on my schedule. And if there is a lingering question in all of this, it is not whether I went too far, it is whether I should have gone this far sooner, because the peace I felt was not dramatic and not cinematic. It was the kind of peace you earn when you do the hardest thing, which is stop asking people to value you and start valuing your time in a way that makes it impossible to miss, and that was the final move, not fireworks and not a slam. Just a door that closed softly behind me while the room on the other side finally figured out how to talk without me holding up the ceiling. And if that sounds cold, then you have never lived your life as the apology someone else rehearses. And if it sounds epic, then good, because it was, and I am not going back.